Welcome to the SARS Tax Practitioner Readiness Program, Module 8, Part 1, Debt Management Process. What are the learning objectives for this module? Well, at the end of this module, we expect of you to understand a little bit about the debt management process itself, to understand the process of payment arrangements, to understand the process for a compromise request, and then lastly, to understand the appointment of third parties to recover any outstanding debts. The most difficult engagements between SARS and taxpayers usually takes place when there is outstanding monies owed to SARS. And these cases are handed over to our colleagues within the debt management space. However, when does a debt become due to SARS? Well, the start of the process is when an assessment or a self-assessment has been raised. Now remember, assessments are raised based on the information that is being submitted by the clients. Now, when these assessments have been raised, there is usually a due date accompanying that assessment. And that due date makes reference to the date by which SARS expects full and final payment of that outstanding amount or of that amount. If by the due date, the payment has still not been made, well, then the debt becomes overdue or the monies becomes overdue, and the process is referred to our debt management colleagues for further collection or processing. Some of the steps that they could take in order to recover the outstanding monies could be third-party appointments, civil judgments, and writs of execution. Now, with civil judgments, that is where we could blacklist a taxpayer for failing to pay us, and a writ of execution is where we could attach your assets in settlement of your debt. What are the different options to pay off any outstanding monies owed to SARS? Well, as a revenue collecting agency, we would always prefer full and final settlement, immediate payment, and the full amount. Now, when your client does make this payment to SARS, please inform them that they need to make or they need to use the correct payment reference numbers. If they don't use the correct payment reference number and the correct tax reference numbers, then the payment is going to be allocated incorrectly. And what will happen is that the amount will still reflect outstanding as per the assessment, because we cannot match up the payment that has made with the debt that is owed. If you cannot pay, or your client cannot pay in full, then we would suggest that they go the route of an installment payment arrangement. And that is in terms of sections 167 and 168 of the Tax Administration Act. If payment arrangements are not an option and times are really financially tough, you could make a compromise request to SARS, and that is in terms of section 200 to 204 of the Tax Administration Act. Now, it's important that you explain to your client the implications of missing the due dates, because obviously that there will then be penalties and interest that they would incur, and also the different payment options that they have at their disposal, namely installment arrangements as well as a compromise request. What is the process then for making a payment arrangement request? Well, in order to make a request, the first thing you need to know is that the taxpayer must be fully compliant when it comes to any returns. So if he makes a request for us from us as of today, he should have then submitted all outstanding returns. If all returns are not submitted, we will reject the request. Okay, now please keep in mind, this is not SARS just rejecting the request because we don't want to enter into payment arrangements. No, we are rejecting the request because all of the returns have not been submitted. Now, a note of caution, please. If you do notice that there are returns outstanding, don't all of a sudden start submitting no returns for the clients that you represent, just so that they can make a payment request. These kind of returns will be scrutinized and looked at. And where we find that you have purely submitted the return to show that you are tax compliant, well, it's not going to be looked upon very favorably, not for your client, as well as not for yourself as a tax practitioner. All deferred arrangement requests must be submitted in writing. They could be done via e-filing. And we brought in the request, the payment arrangement process via e-filing late in 2022. Sorry, late in 2021. Apologies. Deferred arrangements, however, can be considered without any supporting documentation being submitted if the request is up to 11 months and the value of the debt is not 100,000. Now, please keep in mind, it's not the value of each payment that does not exceed 100,000. The total debt must not exceed 100,000 Rand, and then you could request payments of up to 11 months without any supporting documentation. Also, you could make a request for up to 6 months, and if the value is not exceeding 5 million Rand, then you can also submit it without any supporting documents. Deferred arrangements, however, which require supporting documents, is if the requests are more than 11 months and the debt is less than 100,000 Rand, or the request is longer than 6 months but not exceeding 5 million Rand, or for all requests exceeding 5 million Rand, irrespective of the period, we have to have supporting documents submitted. Now, it's important that you keep this in mind. If you enter into a deferred arrangement with SARS or payment arrangements with SARS, please remind your clients to stick to those arrangements. If you fail, or if the client fails to pay us for 1 month, that payment arrangement is null and void. In other words, we go back to square one, where we will request payment, full and final settlement. If your client were to find himself in a position where he cannot pay for whatever reason, he might not be able to pay for 1 month or for 2 months, engage SARS. Come to us and make us aware of the fact that you cannot pay us for 1 month. The worst thing that you can do, that your client can do, is to stick their heads in the sand and wait and think that it's going to go away. Unfortunately, we are not going to go away. So the advice that we would like to give to you is to please ensure that if your client is going to skip a month, notify SARS, inform us of this fact, and we can see what we will do. What is the process for a compromise request? Well, first of all, a compromise request is where you owe SARS 100,000 Rand, but you are not able to pay the full 100,000 Rand. You might however have 60,000 Rand available. And you might approach SARS and say, could I pay the 60,000 Rand in full and final settlement of the 100,000 Rand debt? That is essentially what a compromise request is. Now, all compromise requests must be in writing and it must be signed by the debtor or the taxpayer. SARS then will request certain information. Please ensure that this information that is submitted is up to date and that it is complete. If it is not complete, your compromise request will not be looked at. Okay. Also, when you submit this information, make sure that you submit all of the information. You must be clear as to why you are requesting SARS to accept 60,000 and assume that it is equivalent to 100,000. Make sure that you do not leave out any financial information because SARS will find out about it. Once the required documents are submitted, a full financial analysis will then be done by SARS, after which the case will then be prepared for presentation to an independent debt committee for consideration. So we will only take it to the committee once all the required information has been submitted and processed. And keep in mind again, the documents must be up to date and it must be complete. Please note that taxpayers cannot request SARS to write off full amounts. So you can't come to us and say, I owe you 100,000 Rand, I can't pay you, I'm paying zero. Is that a possibility? It's unfortunately not a possibility. You will not be able to get a full write-off on your tax debt. Also, when we talk about the compromise requests, we usually submissions, you can only request a compromise request once every 3 years. You can't come to us every year and request a compromise. Another option that SARS has, especially with taxpayers that have outstanding, that is employed, we can issue an IT88A or an IT88L. Now, an IT88A is where we request an employer to deduct monies from an employee's salary. And this will then be to start settling the outstanding debt. Alternatively, where a taxpayer submits a tax directive to SARS, maybe for the payment of a lump sum, we could also issue an IT88L. And basically what will happen is that upon the lump sum, before the lump sum is being paid out, that financial institution would then have to withhold a certain amount from that lump sum and pay it over to SARS in settlement of your debt. Please keep in mind as well that when these things starts happening, then usually taxpayers are not involved in the process. Okay, so it's important that taxpayers start engaging SARS before SARS considers these kind of arrangements. The appointment of third parties is another option, and that could be done in terms of Section 179 of the Tax Administration Act. And Section 179 basically says that a senior SARS official may authorize a person who holds or owes any money to a taxpayer to pay that money over to SARS in satisfaction of the taxpayer's outstanding tax debt. So if somebody owes you money, we could say, instead of paying you, pay us, as in SARS. Now, in order to make a third-party appointment, the following steps have to be taken. There must be a taxpayer engagement or a taxpayer meeting. There must be a final demand which is issued, which then grants the taxpayer 10 working days to contact SARS for arrangements. If the taxpayer does not contact SARS to make arrangements as proposed on the final demand, then a third-party appointment will then be issued. Now, it's important that you remember that once these third-party appointments are kicking in, it's usually because the taxpayer has not engaged SARS. We do not want to go the route of making third-party appointments or issuing writs of execution and the like. We would like to engage beforehand with taxpayers. So please make sure that you inform your clients that they engage us beforehand. And also, if they don't provide us with the correct information, contact information, we could be corresponding with somebody that is no longer at an address. We could be corresponding with somebody who does not have that email address anymore. However, they fail to update it with SARS. It doesn't mean that we cannot take any action. We can still take action. It's just that you will not be involved in the process of that taking action. We could also appoint, the appointment of third parties could be banks, it could be financial institutions, it could be employers, or any other person who owes the taxpayer money. What is your role then as a tax practitioner? What would we like you to do? Well, we would want you to inform your clients timelessly of any amounts that are outstanding, and then also the different payment options available to them in order to pay any outstanding debt. Also, make them aware of the actions that SARS can take to recover any outstanding debt, such as third-party appointments, civil judgments, writs of execution, etc. And it will therefore be in the interest of your client to pay any money, outstanding monies, before the due date, or to make alternative arrangements. Also, constantly advise your clients to keep their information up to date. Let them notify SARS of any change to their personal information, such as contact details, address, and the like. If we do this, or if you do this, you can assist your client by avoiding a lot of heartache and pain.